back to the Bears Talk podcast. I am your host and the managing editor of BearsTalk.com, Bryan Perez. You could follow me over on Twitter at Bryan Perez NFL, and make sure you're following Bears Talk on Twitter as well at the Bears Talk. And I wanted to hop on and do a quick show to discuss what was kind of a viral talking point on Twitter over the last few days, specifically on Bears Twitter. This wasn't a national story. This wasn't something that grabbed national headlines, but Bears Twitter was abuzz about the potential, hypothetical, theoretical trade for Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver Tee Higgins. And I thought it'd be a good time to hop on here and let's engage in some conversation, some Bears talk, if you will, to see exactly whether or not this would be a smart idea by the Chicago Bears and whether it's an even a possibility, considering it takes two to tango anytime an NFL trade is discussed. Look, there's no doubt that T Higgins is a legitimate stud wide receiver. He would probably be a number one wideout on most teams that don't already have a guy like Ja'Marr Chase. Higgins in his rookie season looked like he was going to be the next big alpha. He had a 900-yard year as a rookie in 2020, but lo and behold, in 2021, the Bengals came back in the NFL draft and with a high first-round pick, took Ja'Marr Chase, who obviously set the NFL world on fire with a record-breaking rookie season, or at least a near record-breaking rookie season. And that left Tee Higgins to essentially be second fiddle to Ja'Marr Chase, who has instantly become one of the top 3 or 4 wideouts in the game. But it doesn't mean that Tee Higgins isn't a true number one wideout. And therein lies the problem for the Cincinnati Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals are going to enter an offseason in 2023 with the reality that they could have 2 monster wide receiver contracts on the ledger over the next 24 months. After a player hits 3 years of service in the NFL, they're eligible to renegotiate a contract, to look for a contract extension. Higgins, he just finished his 3rd year. He's going to go into a contract year in 2023. Naturally, he's going to look to get paid like some of the wide receivers we saw in the 2022 offseason. And this is what really has made this narrative bubble up. The fact that we saw A.J. Brown last year essentially work his way out of Tennessee by demanding a new contract and ultimately get traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. And now he'll be playing in the Super Bowl against the Kansas City Chiefs after being rewarded with a 4-year, $100 million contract by the Eagles last spring. Or actually, it was last draft weekend at the end of April last year. DK Metcalf, at the end of his 3rd year in Seattle, he was able to renegotiate a new deal. His contract, 3 years, $72 million. And we saw it with Deebo Samuel as well. He finishes his 3rd year. He inks a 3-year, $71.5 million deal. All 3 of those players were considered to be on the trade market last year this time because of those looming contract issues. 1 out of 3 got traded. Now, what was the trade compensation that the Tennessee Titans ended up getting for A.J. Brown? It was a steep price to pay for the Philadelphia Eagles. They traded the Titans the 18th overall pick in the 1st round. And let's see here, the 101st pick overall in the 2022 NFL draft for A.J. Brown. Now, look, hindsight, it was a good deal for the Philadelphia Eagles. It was a missing piece to a Super Bowl offense. And obviously, if they had it to do all over again, they would absolutely do it. The Tennessee Titans flipped that 18th pick into Treylon Burks, who he's got some promising upside. I think he'll be a legitimate player in the league as his career marches on. But if they had it to do all over again, they would probably much rather give A.J. Brown the big payday than trade him. And possibly that could be what the Cincinnati Bengals decide to look at as a reference point. Looking at A.J. Brown, looking at the Titans probably having seller's remorse, the Eagles having no remorse whatsoever for being buyers on that trade market and ultimately stepping up to the plate and paying A.J. Brown, knowing that they do have a guy like Devonta Smith, a 1st-round pick. He just ended his 2nd season. Next year, this time, he'll probably be looking for a new deal. The reality is in the NFL these days, a 1-receiver offense simply isn't enough. You need 2 elite guys, maybe not elite guys, but 2 wide receiver ones in today's game is what offenses need to really be able to compete with teams like the Kansas City Chiefs week in and week out. So the fact that the Bengals already have Ja'Marr Chase doesn't necessarily rule out the potential for them to re-sign Tee Higgins, even as early as this offseason. The Bengals are not strapped against the salary cap, and there are other players that they could decide to move on from if they want to free up cap space. Players like Joe Mixon, another wide receiver like Tyler Boyd, who could be a more realistic target for the Bears, either in trade or as a cap casualty in the offseason. This whole T Higgins trade speculation, trade rumor, viral messaging that happened on Twitter was the result of a really good breakdown of the Cincinnati Bengals offseason, like a three-part breakdown of their offseason that was published on The Athletic. And The Athletic's writer, his name is Paul Denner. He was very clear when addressing the T Higgins situation. He kind of gave it like, here's what could happen with Higgins. The Bengals could likely just say, hey, we have you under contract through 2023. We're not giving you an extension. You're due to get paid $4 million this year. Play out the season. We have the right to use the franchise tag next year this time, or we'll just re-sign you to a huge deal at some point between now and then. They do have that option. The Bengals, T Higgins is a Cincinnati Bengal, and he's a Bengal until 2023 season is over. So there's no reason for the Bengals to feel forced to make a trade. But next year, this time, if they don't have a deal done with T Higgins and they, let's say, have to use the franchise tag with him, and Jamar Chase wants a new contract at the same time, now you understand how these two worlds collide. And logic would suggest the Bengals will probably try to move on at some point and just give back up the Brinks truck for Jamar Chase. But what the article did say on The Athletic is that the most likely outcome is that the Bengals will just let T Higgins play out the 2023 season and cross the contract bridge when they absolutely have to. But for one reason or another, Twitter ran away with the one part of the article. It was like a one sentence section of the T Higgins analysis that said he could be a trade candidate like AJ Brown. He could be a guy that works himself out of Cincinnati. So let's say, for example, the Cincinnati Bengals do decide to trade T Higgins. The next question Bears fans have to ask themselves is, well, do the Chicago Bears have the assets to bring in a guy like Higgins? If A.J. Brown commanded an 18th overall pick and the 102nd pick in the 2022 NFL draft for his services, well, what would T. Higgins command? On face value, you would say T. Higgins and A.J. Brown aren't necessarily the same tier of wide receiver. A.J. Brown has made splashier plays. He seems like a more of a, game breaker than T. Higgins. But the reality is they're not that far off in terms of their production through 3 seasons in the league. We'll ignore A.J. Brown's 2022 year. It was his 4th season. But through their first 3 seasons, you got T. Higgins averaging 4.7 catches per game, 65.8 yards per game, and just under half a touchdown a game. That's T. Higgins per game averages over his first 3 years. Obviously, injuries play a part in this, and other issues can affect the average stats, but that is what T. Higgins averages per game over a 3-year run. In A.J. Brown's first 3 seasons, he averaged 5 catches a game. Remember, T. Higgins 4.7. He's at 78.2 yards per game, significantly better. T. Higgins is at 65.8, so another 13 yards, give or take, from A.J. Brown per game, and he's at 0.6 touchdowns per game. So clearly more productive, but not by much. If A.J. Brown gets an 18th overall pick and the 102nd overall pick, could the Bengals realistically hold out for a late first-round pick for T. Higgins? I think it's within the realm of possibility. And unfortunately for the Bears, they traded that kind of pick, the number 32 overall now, for Chase Claypool already. And while I would suggest that Chase Claypool is not that far off from T. Higgins if everything lines up perfectly, they don't have that pick anymore. That pick is gone. So the fact that some Bears fans might be calling for a trade for T. Higgins, you just have to ask whether or not the ammunition's even there. The only way I could see the Chicago Bears being able to be in the discussion for a T. Higgins trade is if Ryan Poles trades out of the number 1 pick, let's say with the Colts, and the Colts give him the 4, maybe the 35 overall, their second-round pick, and a number 1 pick in 2024. Well, now the Bears could say, hey, look, we're going to take that 35th pick, and we're going to go get ourselves some T. Higgins. And now we flip the 32nd and 35th picks in the second round of the 2023 NFL draft and turned it into Chase Claypool and T Higgins. I mean, that would be like Ryan Poles is playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. If you can get two guys, even if they're 900 to 1100 yard receivers in the second round, two big body dudes, T Higgins, 6'4", 216 pounds. He can run like the wind. You get him and Chase Claypool. You still have Darnell Mooney. Maybe add another wide receiver with maybe a little more speed and shiftiness in the later portion of even day 3. Velus Jones Jr., who knows what he becomes in 2023. The wide receiver room looks very, very different with one trade for T Higgins. It just comes down to whether or not the Bears will be able to put themselves in a position to make that kind of trade. As it stands right now, I don't think they have the ammunition. Their second round pick is what, number 53 overall right now, the Ravens selection that they got in the Roquan Smith trade. Is that enough for the Bengals to say we'll move on from T Higgins? If you're the Bengals, would you trade a legitimate wide receiver one for the 53rd overall pick just because you might not be able to pay him next year this time? To me, I would rather take another run at a Super Bowl with T Higgins and Jamar Chase and sacrifice a 53rd overall pick, even if you know that T Higgins has one more year left on the roster. So I don't know if the Bears are even in that position to make the trade right now, let alone Bears fans clamoring for them to do it. Ryan Poles is like one or two moves away from being in the discussion for T Higgins. He has to make a draft day trade where he accumulates more picks on day 2, early second round picks, for this discussion to even occur. And even then, even if the Bears end up with the 35th overall pick because they were able to trade back with the Colts, the Bengals might say, thanks, but no thanks. We have an established 1,000+ yard guy, 7 touchdowns per season on a team where he clearly is second in the pecking order to Jamar Chase. And if he wasn't second in the pecking order, if the Bengals in some alternate metaverse never drafted Jamar Chase and it was T Higgins offense from start to finish, Joe Burrow's connecting with T Higgins as his go-to guy, T Higgins could very well be a 1,300+ yard guy every single year. That's the kind of player he is. So, of course, yes, Bears fans, we want Ryan Poles to figure this out. We want Justin Fields to be dropping back. Looking to his left, he sees T. Higgins. Looking to his right, he sees Chase Claypool. Somewhere running out of the slot is Darnell Mooney, and you got the big body Cole Kmet as his bailout option. That sounds like one of the best offenses in the NFC. That has that kind of potential. But can it happen? We'll have to wait and see. But what we really need to do as a Bears fan group, right? A Bears fandom, like the kingdom of Bears fans, especially if you're a Bears Talk faithful. We have to be realistic about our expectations going into this offseason. Speculation coming out of the Senior Bowl based on sources that Kevin Fishbane, the Chicago Bears beat reporter with The Athletic, said that he spoke with. Ryan Poles is going to be aggressive in free agency. Ryan Poles is going to spend money on the offensive line, according to these reports that came out of Mobile during Senior Bowl week. We know that Ryan Poles is going to do something over the next couple of months. He is not going to take $98 million in cap space, almost twice as much as the next team in the list of salary cap room. He's not going to take that salary cap space and put it in a piggy bank. He's going to spend it. And obviously, we're all anticipating that he's going to spend it on resources, players who are going to help Justin Fields. Justin Fields is the beginning, middle, and end of the Chicago Bears present and future. So obviously these offensive line rumors, the fact that he's going to invest in veteran, established, top shelf, free agent offensive linemen, I love it, because that's a position where if a guy is good in year 3, year 4, year 5, chances are he's going to be really good in year 6, year 7, year 8. That's the turnover. If you look at all pro teams, if you look at Pro Bowl teams, once that veteran offensive lineman becomes best in class, he usually stays in that range. And you don't always get the best of the best in free agency, but you get some really good guys that make it to the open market. So targeting offensive linemen is a reasonable expectation in free agency for Bears fans. It's reasonable to think that Ryan Poles is going to go out and spend some money on those free agents, like the offensive line, like pass rushers, maybe some help on defense. But at wide receiver, Is it reasonable to think that we're going to be able to land a player like T Higgins? There's so many things that have to happen for that to become a reality. The Bengals have to be willing to dance in the trade, have to be willing to be a partner in the trade dance. The Bengals have to be willing to accept a second round pick for T Higgins. The Bears have to be willing to trade T Higgins and give him a contract that probably pays him north of $75 million over 3 or 4 years upon completion of the trade. This won't be like a Chase Claypool trade where Chase Claypool has to prove it and play his way into that next contract. This is going to be a situation where the reason why T Higgins is getting traded is because the Bengals can't pay him, and whoever he's getting traded to is going to pay him upon landing in that new city. So the Bears have to be willing to spend that money too. We know they can do it, but it's going to take a lot of wheeling and dealing for Ryan Poles to get there. So is it reasonable to think that they're going to make that trade? Probably not. Wishful thinking, of course. Hold out hope and optimism, absolutely. But I think what you're going to see is the Bears putting a lot more of their eggs in the basket of Chase Claypool, a healthy recovery with Darnell Mooney, and probably a rookie in the second round who can come in and challenge both of them for legitimate reps at the top of the pecking order in the depth chart. So at the end of the day, is T Higgins coming to Chicago? Who knows? The NFL's crazy. We've seen crazy things happen before. Nobody ever in a million years expected A.J. Brown to be traded to the Tennessee Titans last April. So maybe we'll be sitting here in the second round of the 2023 NFL draft. Ryan Poles picked up the Indianapolis Colts or some other team's top second round pick. And lo and behold, the Chicago Bears acquired T. Higgins from the Cincinnati Bengals. It'll be wonderful that if that happens. And if it does, we'll have it covered from all angles on bearstalk.com, on Twitter at Bryan Perez NFL, on Twitter at the Bears Talk. Make sure you go to our Facebook page, also at Bears Talk, and please subscribe. Bang that subscribe button. Every time we post a new video, we're going to have a lot more of these talking point type videos, as well as our longer podcast videos here on the YouTube channel. We're getting close to that subscriber number, that big threshold that every YouTube channel, that every YouTube brand strives to hit. You guys have been fantastic. We're over 500 subscribers already. We're getting closer to that 1,000 number. So hit that subscribe button. Tell your friends and fellow Bears fans about us, and keep coming back for a lot more Bears talk. And most importantly, Bears fans, bear down.